Hi, it's Dr. Crone again. In this video, we're going to talk about political parties in the United States, and in particular about the U.S. two-party system. In the United States, we've always had only two major political parties. Right now, those are the Democrats and the Republicans. Let's start by thinking about whether this is a good situation or not. On the screen, you can see a standard political poll question asking Americans about the need for a third party. How would you answer this question? In your view, do the Republican and Democratic parties do an adequate job of representing the American people, or do they do such a poor job that a third major party is needed? Since 2012, a majority of Americans have said they believe a third party is needed, and that number has been growing. Did you answer the same way? You can see from this chart that the numbers have changed over the years, but for almost 20 years, at least 40% of Americans have wanted a third party. So why do we only have two parties? Especially since we know there are lots of democratic countries that have many political parties. That's a very good question. The main reason that we have two and only two viable political parties is because of the type of election system we have. In the U.S., we have single-member districts for congressional elections with a winner-take-all system of deciding the representative. That means that every member of Congress was elected because they had the most votes, what's called a plurality, in their district. That doesn't mean they had a clear majority, which is over 50%. It just means that they got the most votes. Our electoral college also functions in most states as a winner-take-all system, where the candidate with the plurality of votes in a state gets all the state's electoral votes for president. Whoever wins the electoral college becomes president and has the privilege of choosing their own cabinet members, who are the heads of the executive branch departments. That's not the only democratic election system. Many democracies choose a different system, called a multi-member district proportional representation system. In that system, legislators are chosen based on the proportion of the vote they win. And most of the countries also have a system called cabinet government, where parties form coalitions to create a majority of votes in parliament and choose their own cabinet members from the coalition parties. Let's explore these two systems further through a hypothetical example. Imagine a new democracy deciding how to elect members to its legislature. Let's say this legislature will have 50 members. If the country chooses a single-member district winner-take-all system, then the country will be divided into 50 geographical districts with equal population. Each district will be represented by one legislator. This is like the system we have in the US. But instead, the country could choose a multi-member district system with proportional representation. In that case, they might decide that each district should be represented by 5 legislators. They could have chosen a lower or higher number, but let's say they decided on 5. They would then divide the country into 10 geographical districts with equal population, each represented by 5 legislators. Now it's election time in our hypothetical country. If they had chosen the first option, single-member districts, they would have a winner-take-all election. Let's say that in any given district, Party A got 41% of the vote, which was the most. Then the candidate from Party A would represent that district in the legislature, even though they did not win a majority of the votes. Whoever comes in first wins the election, just like in a horse race. Sometimes this is called a first-past-the-post system, based on the post in horse racing. And if Party A got the most votes in every district in this system, even if it was just by a small percentage, then Party A would win every single seat in the legislature. But if our hypothetical country had chosen the second option, multi-member districts with proportional representation elections, then the outcome would have been very different with the same vote distribution. In a proportional representation election, Seats in the district are assigned based on the proportion of vote won by all the parties in the election. Therefore, in our example, both Party A and B would probably be assigned the same number of representatives in a district, since they won approximately the same proportion of votes. And Party C, our minor party, would win 1 seat. You can see that if the same vote distribution held across all districts, Party C, the minor party, would have 20% of the seats in the legislature, while in the first system, it would have had 0. Now you might say, who cares? Even in proportional representation, Party C still doesn't have a majority in the legislature, so it's not like they can pass legislation and get what they want. Well, you'd be partly right. They do have a minority in the legislature, but it turns out it's going to be a very important minority in our hypothetical country. Since Party A and Party B both have the same amount of seats in our proportional representation legislature, neither one of them has a majority either. Party C's votes will be very much needed by one of the large parties to form what's called a coalition government. For example, Party A might ask Party C to join with them to become the majority coalition in the legislature. That will be the group then that gets to pick all the cabinet positions in the executive branch. Party C might say, well, we're willing to join with you, but only if you agree to vote in favor of the issues we want, and if you choose someone from our party to be an important cabinet member. Most likely, Party A will agree to this because they need Party C's cooperation to maintain power and block Party B. This turns out to make small parties in these types of systems quite important and powerful, and gives citizens a good reason to vote for them. In the United States, because of our single-member district winner-take-all system, there just aren't any rewards like that for minor parties. Because they almost never get the most votes in an electoral district, they almost never win seats in Congress. And therefore, they can't be part of legislative decision-making. Instead, they're always left out on the outside of politics. This is 90% explained by the mathematical realities of a winner-take-all election system. But there are also some other barriers encountered by third parties in the US. First, many laws that apply to elections make it more difficult for third parties to win. For example, US congressional districts are incredibly large compared to those of other countries. Congress has the ability to increase the number of districts and therefore make districts smaller, but they don't. One reason for that is that the current system benefits the Republicans and the Democrats. Smaller parties might elect rival third parties that have geographical concentration. There are also legal limits on what candidates can qualify for taxpayer money to spend on election campaigns, and limits on what parties are allowed on the ballot in elections. These laws also help keep third parties from succeeding in elections. Then there are systemic reasons. 200+ years of a two-party system has led voters to understand that even though they might want to vote for a minor party, that party has no chance of winning. Therefore, most voters see a third-party vote as a wasted vote. Because of this reality, parties have an even harder time getting their message out, since the media, the debate hosts, and campaign donors all focus on giving access and resources to those who are perceived as having a chance of winning. These legal and systemic factors are important, but they alone could not stop minor parties in the US. Remember that the most important underlying reason for a lack of third parties is the system we have chosen to elect our representatives, single-member districts with winner-take-all elections. You might ask whether minor parties ever have any political power in the United States then. The answer is yes, but it's a strange and somewhat self-defeating kind of power. A strong minor party candidate can split the vote on their side of the ideological divide and end up hurting the party they are most ideologically close to. This then helps the party they are farthest away from. This is sometimes called being a spoiler in an election. Here are two recent examples from political history. Ralph Nader was a very well-known and very liberal presidential candidate representing the Green Party in 2000. One reason he ran was because some very liberal Americans saw Al Gore, the Democratic candidate, as being too moderate. Nader ended up winning about 5% of the vote. This took just enough votes away from Al Gore, the Democrat, and led to the election of George W. Bush, a conservative Republican, in a very, very close election. The same type of situation happened back in 1992, but with the opposite ideology. In 92, Ross Perot, a conservative businessman who wanted to cut taxes and government spending, formed his own party called the Reform Party. He ran for president and won more votes than any minor party candidate in the 20th century, about 20% of the vote. But in the winner-take-all electoral college, he got 0 votes. Instead, he took votes away from the Republican George H.W. Bush, which helped elect Bill Clinton, the Democrat. This leaves us with a natural question. Why in the world do minor parties get involved in U.S. politics anyway, if they have no hope of winning, especially if they can help elect those who are polar opposites from them in ideology? There are probably many answers to that question, but the main reason is that being a spoiler gets them a lot of attention, especially from the party closest to them ideologically. They help expose important issues and groups of voters that the major parties would have ignored otherwise. For example, Ralph Nader from the Green Party helped put the issue of climate change onto the national stage and forced the Democratic Party to become more liberal, especially on climate issues. Similarly, Ross Perot's Reform Party brought the issue of the budget deficit to our national attention and forced the Republicans to take a strong stand on tax and budget cuts for decades afterwards. The two major parties we see today were shaped by the challenge of the minor ones, even if those challenges didn't lead to victory. We've come to the end of our video on the two-party system. Before you turn off the video, take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. First, list 3 major takeaways that stand out from what you've heard. Now reflect on the two-party system. Do you think it's a positive or a negative for the U.S.? Why do you say that? If you think it's a negative, what changes would you suggest? Reflecting on these questions now will help you respond to one of our essay prompts. I hope you've enjoyed this video on the two-party system. Good luck with your studies.